Hi, everybody. Welcome to our second Creating During COVID event that we're having tonight. I'm Katrina Railton, and I am the president for SPAC Junior Committee. So while we're going through this event, there's actually an option where you can, down in the chat window, you can submit your questions. So if you have any questions, we're going to leave some time at the end so that we can do some Q&A. And make sure you turn your cameras on. We want to see all your smiling faces so that it's a little more personal when we see, interactions and all of that. One thing we do ask is that you do stay muted throughout the discussion. And one thing I want to bring up is that we've, in the second event, we've raised $200 in which Junior Committee is going to match all of those funds. So right now, I think we're about $465 that we have raised through the two events. And one thing, if you did get any takeout from Sunhee's, or if you did one of the baskets, if you want to tag those, we would love if you could tag Sunhee's Farm and Kitchen and SPAC as well. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the SPAC president, Elizabeth Sobol, and Jinah Kim from Sunhee's Farm and Kitchen.
Thank you, everybody. I want to thank Katrina and the Junior Committee. Doing this virtual series was their idea, and it's taken on a life of its own, and it's just really exciting. And I want to thank Heather Varney in particular from SPAC for tireless work in getting all of this set up. I am personally so thrilled to welcome our guest tonight, Gina Kim from Sunhee's Kitchen. I love that restaurant. I love the food. I love the feel. And I really didn't know much about Gina Kim when I was just going to experience the food, but over the last year or so, I've been following the amazing things that she has been doing, not just in a restaurant, but for people, for the community. And I'm so moved by her ethos and what drives her. And we're gonna get into all that exciting and wonderful things that she's doing for the community. But Gina, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this tonight.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So happy to be here.
So I just before we kind of get into the present and the years leading up to the present, let's just go back to growing up. Like, where'd you grow up? And I believe you're a Capital Region girl, basically, right?
I am, yes, I am a Latham Shaker girl. Yeah. So my family actually moved here back in 2001. My father he's actually a pastor, which many people don't know, and he started a church right up on Hoosick Street, like where the Walgreens is, and that's kind of how we got our introduction into the area. They even went as far as starting a business in downtown Albany, in Westgate Plaza on Central Avenue. It was a jewelry store called Eden Jewelers. I'm not sure how far down people come to venture, but I figured I would love to just talk more even about my family, because that really is where the idea behind Sunhee's and even all the principles that lay at our foundation and who we are, naturally it comes from my upbringing. And so I actually have a photo of my family that I would love to share. Let me see, there we go. So this is actually my family from, I was just born, I believe. Yes, it's 1990. So that kind of gives away my age. But there I am, and I was born in Korea, in Incheon, which is a fairly large port city. The biggest airport is there as well. And so you can see here, I have one brother and my parents, and I'm sure we'll go further into this in the conversation, but both of my parents are heavily involved in the business.
That's great. Love that photo. So talk about, did you want to show anything else before did you have anything?
Oh, I'll jump in and out.
Right,
yeah, sure.
Well, so talk about growing up, and talk about like the importance of food, and who cooked, and what are some of the dishes that were important in your life. What influence?
Actually, I should have kept the Prezi up. I'll go back to that just because the next photo actually is really representative of I think my childhood, and this dish here is my favorite food growing up. So the main chef in our kitchen is my mom. And so she works alongside her best friend who are at Sunhee's, and the name was derived from their names connected together. But this dish here is called chogi, which is actually yellow croaker. So it's a grilled fish, very stinky. It has that like oceanic smell. You know, when someone grills it in the oven, the entire house smells like literally reeks of this. And so, you know, growing up, because we were Korean American immigrants and being in a majority, I think, non-Korean and non-Asian American city and neighborhood, it was definitely a struggle, you know, just trying to even find myself, learning about who I am as a Korean and an American at the same time. But I remember even with this dish, I have so many stories with it, but there was one time where my mom had cooked it for me because it was my favorite meal as a kid. Even when I was 2 years old, I learned how to use these little tiny metal chopsticks just so I can fillet the fish myself, no help at all. I'll just really get in there and eat it to the bare bone. That's how much I love this fish. So I remember in middle school, I was living right across from Gupta's Arena in Latham, and my mom had cooked this meal. I had come home from school, brought a bunch of girlfriends over, and the first thing we smell as soon as we walk in the door is this fish. And so naturally, as a 12-year-old girl, I was horrified, embarrassed, humiliated. I remember like just going to the bathroom, calling my mom, asking, why did you cook this fish of all days when I'm, bringing my friends over, my American, girlfriends over. And so like, that was a moment where I really, felt embarrassed of my food and my culture. I felt embarrassed that my parents didn't know how to speak English properly, that, I come from this different place and that we speak a different language at home and eat different things. And so at that point, when I wasn't exactly sure of who I was, this dish really represented, embarrassment for me. But even so, throughout the years, I just remember my mom would cook this particular dish infrequently, but during special occasions, whether it was my birthday. I remember the night before I went to go study abroad in Germany, my mom had made this dish. And it's very special to me, especially because even when my family and I ate it together, my dad would always eat the head part and spare me the rest of the body. I think I've told the story even multiple times with different audiences, but ultimately this dish really symbolized the sacrifice that my parents would make as a kid growing up, here in Latham, New York, the sacrifices that they made to live in a new country, the work that they do, but also ultimately even the work that they are doing now. They used to work very minimum wage jobs in Latham Circle. There was a mobile gas station that my parents would do alternating shifts, working the day shift, and then my dad would come in and work the night shift. This was prior to starting their business. And so all of that, it really, this dish symbolized that. My dad would always give me the body, and the whole time I thought he was just really in love with the head part of the fish, only to realize as an adult that he was giving it up for me. Even today, they're so present in the space, in the restaurant. They pour their heart and souls into the food. When we started the space and started creating the space, I remember like all the endless nights that we worked on construction and renovations together. This one right here is that dish for me.
Wow, that is some story. I love that. And your dad, like I grew up in rural North Carolina, and all my dad, my grandmothers, they all had kitchen gardens, and in the summer, like there was nothing better than have like your grandmother was cooking biscuits or something, and you could go out into the garden and pick that tomato and that onion that you then sliced and put right on the bread, and there's just like nothing like that. You're tasting the warmth from the sun, like right on your tongue, And I know your dad, you have it's Sunhee's farm as well as restaurant. Like, so talk to us about the farm and the importance of that to your dad, to the family, to the food.
Sure. So they actually moved onto the farm prior to opening the restaurants. This was back in 2012. I was graduating college. And when they had moved onto the farm, it's funny because none of us had ever imagined that we would be starting a restaurant. So the farm was really just a personal choice for them. They wanted to move onto the land, really work it. And in Korea, I think, especially with Korean food, it's extremely labor intensive. Korean food is very simple, but the work that goes into it, it takes a lot of time. Like kimchi is that perfect example, right? It's backbreaking, laborious work. You know, back in the day, when there was no refrigeration, they would dig holes just to preserve it, and entire villages would come together just to, you know, make, like, I don't know how many pounds, like, if you had to count the heads of the kimchi, like hundreds and hundreds of heads of the cabbage. But the farm too, I think my parents were just really thinking about where the food comes from, but also wanting to invest into it on a much more personal and ground level. So moving there, none of them had prior farming experience. Again, they grew up in a port city, very industrial, and so this was all new. But the amount of you know, lessons that we learned, just having to, you know, even just the act of waking up early and having to, you know, do the same thing every single day consistently, knowing again, the labor, that the sweat and tears that goes into the food that we eat. And for us, we really wanted to focus on bringing back some of the Korean bred vegetables too, which are very different from what you see in the supermarkets. So we focus primarily on things like perilla leaves, you know, Korean hot peppers. There are specific things, and rather than trying to, you know, outdo the farmers in the area, we'll actually collaborate with them, you know, get things like carrots and onions from the local guys, and then grow what we cannot find anywhere else.
That's awesome. That's really great. I mean, so you'd never had like real farming experience. So was it just totally like trial and error? Did you have people who helped, and you know, how did that's a huge
Oh God, yeah, no, absolutely no experience.
Wow.
My dad's definitely he was the bold one to step into that field. I remember even when I was between jobs, I went out onto the fields. I had overalls, I had my, you know, rubber boots. I was like ready, looking the part, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I think I spent the entire day just pulling weeds. You know, it's not glamorous work, contrary to what I think some even some people in our generation now might think. But yeah, for them, it was a lot of trial and error. And actually, there's a beautiful movie that just came out called Minari, Minari. It's about a Korean American family that immigrated into 1980s. And Minari is a Korean spinach. It's a very particular, you know, breed of vegetables. But that kind of stuff, you actually just sprinkle it on, or so, like you just sow it into the fields in swampy areas, and they'll grow very naturally. So for us, we focus a lot even on what we call edible weeds, things like, you know, ramps, things that you can find in the mountainsides. We Koreans will, you know, eat those right to the root. Dandelion leaves, all of those things we make side dishes. Very medicinal, even things like ginseng, different, you know, stages of ginseng we'll plant, and we've lost a lot of good ones, a lot of good seeds to the soil just from, you know, everyday mistakes.
I think that's great. I mean, I definitely, I think it's so wonderful up, you know, particularly up here where there's so much beautiful, you know, farmland and woods and nature and everything. There is so much foraging to be done, you know, but
Yeah.
you also have to know, you know, where to look, when to look, what to eat, what not to eat, you know. But I love the idea, you know, like growing up in North Carolina, like, you know, dandelion leaves, like that was really important, you know, like great nutrients and everything. And I love the fact that we're all getting back to actually using the plants around us that are so nutritious and medicinal at the same time. I love that. So, you know, it's interesting. You know, we launched the series with Anissa Wahid, and, you know, I find it really interesting. Like, Anissa didn't start out wanting to be a chef. She had all these other interests, you know, and she found her way to opening a restaurant. And you too, like okay, so your dad took on starting a farm without any experience being a farmer, and you took on opening a restaurant. Before we get to the restaurant, let's talk about, you know, the time between that 12-year-old came home with all her friends and the fish cooking, and then what was your path? Like, I'm just so interested in your sort of your ethos around just living in this world. It's a really interesting story.
Yeah, no, you know, it's funny, even when you're saying you're highlighting culinary arts, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am not a chef. Like, maybe I should get my mom to be, you know, talking, just because even now, I am not a chef. Like, I am not the mastermind behind the recipes. I'm line cook, dishwasher at best. And, you know, I've been just learning so much working side by side with my mother. But when it came to the business side of things, I guess that's where I really stepped in. But I had no clue I wanted to even be in the food industry. This was definitely all new. I actually majored in international relations in college. And even at that point, you know, that's such an interdisciplinary field. People go into business or nonprofit work, you know, finance, account, like all of those different things. And I remember graduating and still having absolutely no idea what it is that I wanted to pursue, except knowing I had a very strong sense of purpose. Like, I knew what I wanted in terms of the communities that I wanted to work with. I think identifying my identity as a Korean American and more broadly as an immigrant American really took hold during my college years. And actually, my initial interest, even in working with refugee populations, was because I felt a strong pull to learn more about the human rights crisis in North Korea. And that kind of like snowballed into this thing where I started teaching English just as like a side gig throughout college. And afterwards, I moved to New York City to work with Catholic Charities at the Refugee Resettlement Office. I started off as a volunteer, actually, like full-time volunteer. That turned into a full-time job as a case manager and a program administrator. But I had just so much fun working with amazing individuals on a daily basis, both, you know, both people who have refugee or asylee status. In New York City, you see more asylees just because of the cost of living. So it's usually more established individuals. But nevertheless, you know, learning a language, that never stops. There are these shared challenges that I so closely identified with, and especially as an Asian American, you know, entering that field with that perspective, having firsthand understanding, but at the same time, like, being able to speak fluent English and really appreciating that. I think I always remind myself of the first, I remember the first day I was at preschool and how embarrassed I was. I couldn't speak freely. And actually for the first 3 months of preschool, I didn't say a word. And so all of those memories, I think what could have been, I wouldn't go as far as saying traumatic, but hindrances to really, you know, I really wanted to redeem myself in those areas. Even the times that I felt embarrassed of Korean food, now I get to share it with everyone in such a way where I'm sharing my story, but people are enjoying it. You know, people who've never even grew up with Korean food, they're eating bibimbap every single day. And when my mom and I look at that, we're like, wow, like that is amazing. Like, I can't eat a burger every day if you told me to. And so for a few years, I was working in refugee resettlement in New York. I moved back here knowing that I wanted to start something. I wasn't quite sure what it was going to look like, but I think with the farm element and the strong connection with my food, with Korean food and my identity as a Korean American, I knew just the pieces came together at the right time. I moved back into the Albany area, working with the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants as a job developer. And at that time, you know, you just kind of space job, look around. And even as early as high school, my dad would actually take me to real estate showings along Wolf Road. I mean, now I would never open anything up on Wolf Road, but back then I was like, oh, Wolf Road's a cool place to be. That's where all the chains are. And so I knew I always had that entrepreneurial spirit. I always knew like I wanted to start something. I wasn't sure what, but with my experience in refugee resettlement, teaching English and really seeing education as that whole nother, you know, opportunity, especially in the context of adult education. I wanted to start a business that would combine those different elements. And I saw that space in Troy, and I had no plan to start a business that early on. I had only been living in Albany. I was back in Albany for about like 3 months when I found the space, and you just have that feeling, this is it. And that's when we moved in, and we knew our mission. Employment in particular, so using the kitchen space as a learning environment, having positions that as a stepping stone really for people who are new to this country, who just need that extra edge on their way to their own career paths. And so for us, that was our vision, that and we didn't think it would even evolve to the point that it has, but we really all of our decisions came back to that, that mission, that purpose of really empowering immigrant communities in the context of not having as strong of a representation in certain areas of New York.
I just love that. I mean, I was listening to a couple of podcasts or interviews you've done, and there was one, there's so many things stuck, sort of struck me, but you said something about things not just being about a passion, but doing what's right and good, and that just so resonated with me. And that really permeates what you're doing. I mean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about just during COVID, how you've been taking care of your employees, and from what I hear, how they've been taking care of Sunhee's kitchen. So
as for many of us, and still, COVID is very real and very, very challenging. And I just remember that those first couple of weeks in March where we had to make a lot of quick decisions too. Like, it's not like and things were changing very rapidly. And so we found that we had to respond to it in a way that was also reflective of who we are and what we really cared about. A lot of it, came down to like just shutting off all that excess stuff. Like I think the truth really came out during COVID, the best and the worst truths of all of us, right? And relationships that had problems, like those cracks, all the cracks would come out, like all the issues started coming out. And same thing with the good things. You really started to, saw the good in people. And for us, I am so indebted and grateful for my staff, all of those individuals who could have easily just gone on unemployment. They probably would have made twice as much being on unemployment, but they chose to stick around. And I think that's when I really realized, like, I'm not like, or I had to remind myself, and I still do, it's like, we're not the ones just like, I'm not the one only giving. I'm not always the one who has to be that hero. And if anything, Sunhee's exists because of each and every individual, each person that, that pours their energy into the business, whatever, stage of life that they're in. And even if it's for a couple months, like we found that the contributions are really huge. And during COVID, especially, there were a lot of I wouldn't say fights, but disagreements, even in terms of like how we're going to move forward. I remember like one of my staff, she actually kind of like rebuked me for buying these like little display items that we had no use for. And I remember thinking like, gosh, like this girl works for me and she's yelling at me, but she cared so much about the business that she didn't want me going out, buying display items that had no use at the current. She's like, do we really need this right now? And I'm like, man, like that's good stuff right there. She cares so much. Even little things like the gochujang in our bottles. You know how like you get to the end of a ketchup bottle and like a lot of people just throw it out, but our people, they'll dig that gochujang out. Like they'll dig that hot sauce out because they know, how much work went into it, and even that is considered waste. And so I think during these times we've all communally like really work together to make ends meet, to not waste where we don't have to waste, and really invest and pour into the programs that really matter. So we put all of our English programming into a virtual program, and that's been really great too. That the teachers, all of our volunteers are just like really stepping it up. And quickly transitioning at a time when even we don't know what's going on exactly. And now our classes have grown. I actually see one of our volunteers, Drea, out there too. She works with our ACE program, so we're finding ways to provide laptops, especially to people when they're sharing computers with their families, so they can keep learning.
No, I mean, I find it just so amazing and just fascinating. Like looking back at your experiences as a young girl and the not understanding English and struggling with that, and the power of food and family and community in your life, and then how you managed to manifest it in this thing that you've created that is so much about all of those things. I mean, maybe explain a little bit to the audience tonight, like the whole English class, like how does that work? How do you bring people in? How is that part of Sunhee's?
Yeah, absolutely. So our English classes, we started about 6 months into the business, but that was always actually like woven into the business plan. We knew that we were going to have language classes for adults. I remember, just working day in, day out, working the front, working the kitchen, and then one day we're just like, we need to do this right away. And because at that point we had staff who were working with us who wanted to attend language classes. So what we do now is we shut down the restaurant from Monday through Thursday, 3 to 4:30, so that we could allow for the space for staff particularly to attend those classes if they wish. So it's supposed to be a hand-in-hand employment and educational program where someone who works with us can either extend their shift by attending the class or arrive early and at least have that opportunity if they wanted to attend. But we also open the class to all community members, and with Zoom especially, we're able to reach people outside. Transportation has always been an issue. Finding childcare was an issue, but now we find that those barriers are gone, and people are able to actually attend with ease of access. So that's been really, really great. Our numbers in our classes have tripled over the course of the year. So we offer 3 different levels currently, just all the way from beginner to advanced conversation. Really focusing on everyday life skills. So we don't focus so much on grammar or no one's like studying to take certain exams or they don't want like accredited university credits or anything. It's really just as a way of building up that confidence and feeling and assimilating better and feeling more a part of the community and feeling confident when you're going to the store and the gas station, whatever it might be. And so that's really the primary focus of our classes, building each other up, also creating that space for a community where everyone knows that they're not alone. People in our classes, they ask like, oh, so do you speak another language and teach it? And absolutely not. It's like, even for the beginner class, we just conduct it in English, and you have people from like 10, 15 different countries speaking multiple different languages. And despite that, the level of communication is really amazing, and people learn together. They also realize that they have commonalities and that they're struggling together. And so I think that's what's really powerful about the classes.
Wow, that's really beautiful. I was kind of wondering, like, I think about, a Korean restaurant, particularly like the Korean food that it's your mom's, it's like home cooking, and how incredible that is. And I, like my husband is from Cuba, and he's a musician. He goes out on the road a lot. Well, other times outside of COVID, and it's so funny, like, often when the catering comes in, there will be Mexican food for these Cubans, because it's sort of like, oh, they're from Latin America, they speak Spanish, therefore they're going to eat this food. And Cuban food and Mexican food are as different as French food and, I don't know, Chinese food or whatever. I mean, it's very, very different, and Cubans don't eat spicy food. So that's always a problem for them on the road. And so I just wanted how you think about that. Like, Korean food is not yet, and I hope it will be one of those, it should be one of those front and center Asian cuisines, but it's not yet. I just wondered how you thought about that when you thought about how to bring in diners and create a clientele for Korean food, particularly like home cooked Korean food, which
Yeah.
isn't what you're going to see on the, you know, on the sort of Pan Asian menus, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and most of our clientele is not Korean, and I think we recognized that early on and knew we wanted to actually cater to non-Koreans. We wanted to meet people where they are, and introduce people to Korean food, especially if they've never had it before. So a lot of that is really threaded into the little details of the business. So even like why we only have a single page menu is because we want to keep it simple, approachable. The name of our business, Sunhee's, you know, it's unfamiliar and it looks Korean, but at the same time, it's very easy to say. So all of those things we thought about extremely intentionally, because we knew that as Korean Americans, or at least for myself, as a second generation Korean American, I wanted to act as that bridge. And I understood that there would be people who confused us, you know, with different cuisines. They would come in looking for, you know, sushi, or I get General Tso's a lot. There was even one moment, like at an event, someone saw our kimbap rolls. It has like a seaweed wrap on it with vegetables, and someone looked at it and said, "Oh, like sushi, I love Chinese food." And I remember just being like, "Oh my gosh, like what do I do?" And but at the same time, it's I think I find those moments to be rare opportunities where here is someone in our space wanting to try our food. I think if I look at it one way, it could be really like, oh my gosh, like this person really doesn't know, and oh man, why am I, you know, here in Latham or Troy, whatever. But I think ultimately, you know, we love, you know, Troy, we love the capital region, and we're here for a reason. Like we chose to be here. If I wanted to be in a big city, I would have gone to a big city, right? But being here, I think we had to accept that and invite people into the discussion, you know, and challenge people along the way too. Like we want to meet people where they are, but at the same time, you know, just nudge them. You know, you're thinking outside the box. You're wanting to try new things. Like at first, you start with the easy stuff, right? Bibimbap, bulgogi, mandu, and then, you know, later on, well, you know, all of a sudden you have a you know, special dish that's seasonal, and people are trying it because they trust the brand, they trust the restaurant. And so for us, we want to build those relationships, and again, really look at every moment, and even, you know, times when people are misinformed as opportunities for education. So I think that mission of education unfolds in our everyday as well when it comes to, you know, approaching customers. It's not just about providing English education, but it's also about providing cultural education and being open to it. And again, having the space to facilitate that.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm just curious, like, okay, so Troy has a lot of really cool restaurants. It's a really good food scene. Like, what's your week like? I mean, not during COVID, but like, what's your week like? What other kind of food do you like? Where do you go? Like, do you revel in the fact that Troy has this awesome food scene?
Oh yeah, no, Troy is amazing. And I know a lot of folks are from Saratoga, and Saratoga is amazing too. A lot of good food and new restaurants coming up. But we've even like coined this term Troy Asia. We started like a night market where we invite different vendors and highlighting especially Asian American cuisine or Asian cuisine too. So we have like a whole, I think at total we had like 11 or 12 Asian restaurants in Troy, which is, you know, pretty good for this area. I'm a huge fan of like Vietnamese, you know, Quan's over on 3rd Street. We had started together when we did a convenience store. And there, you know, K-Plate is another like more street style Korean food, which we find to be extremely accessible. Even the price point is nice and affordable. You know, they're quick, easy, and the kids who do it are great. I call them kids, but they're grown. And yeah, I don't know. For me, I would say a bowl of rice and kimchi also is the spot any day. I'm very biased towards Korean food, so I sometimes feel bad for, you know, not.
Well, I have to say, like, I can't remember when I became obsessed with kimchi. I don't know. I think it was when I went to Korea for the first time, and the whole, I'm gonna mispronounce it, like, but the whole banchan, like the
Yeah,
small,
no, that was great.
like, to me that's like so incredible. And now it's like, you know, kimchi's kind of, I mean, it's not, maybe not quite as prevalent as the word sushi as sort of a defining, you know, part of Japanese cuisine, but kimchi has become pretty prevalent. It's kind of amazing to think of that, something with a very strong, distinctive, you know, taste has entered, you know, entered our culinary vocabulary, as it were. So, I mean, does
Yeah.
your mom makes, you mean, does she make kimchi at home? Like the Sunhee's kimchi is really awesome. Like, where does she make the kimchi?
Yeah, no, we make it right in our kitchen, and
Right.
Mrs. Kim is, my mom is the one, I call her Mrs. Kim in a professional setting, and yeah, she's the one who, you know, spearheads that. We've been jarring it up and selling it wholesale as well with Capital Roots and Honest Weight. And it's amazing. Yeah, like you said, kimchi is so hot right now, but I really hope that it's not just a phase, because the health benefits involved, I mean, people are saying it could COVID too. Yeah, so there's all these legends behind kimchi because of the age of the recipe and those foundational elements and the ingredients that really work together for that fermentation process. Yeah. I mean, for us, I think one of the reasons why our kimchi is so amazing is because we continue to do it in small batches. And my mom is the one who does all the spices and the labor part of it. And we have the saying in Korean, it's called 손맛. The literal translation is taste of the hands. And they say that if you, depending on the person who makes the kimchi, and like just I don't know, like that aura that comes out of that person goes into the food that's being made. And so that's why, like, if your grandma makes the kimchi, it's going to taste a little different from the way your mom makes it, even if it's...
Well, isn't it kind of like terroir, you know, and like in wine making, it's like, you know, there is something like so personal. And when I got the kimchi from, you know, from you guys, it like just opening the jar, the smell of it, the taste of it, the complexion of, you know, the different, you know, quantities of spice versus, you know, it's so unique, and I imagine that it's a real signature from person to person. It puts their love and energy into making it. It's really incredible. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting, you know, just I was going to say resurgence, but it's not a resurgence. It's a, you know, kind of a new element now into, you know, more of the American culinary psyche now about the importance of pickling and fermentation and the health benefits of it, but also just the sheer taste qualities of things that have that, you know, the umami. Is there a Korean equivalent of, like, is there a Korean word for umami, by the way?
Umami. Well, you know, mat is taste, but yeah, I can't say. No, umami is a very distinct Japanese. Yeah, I don't have a Korean word for it.
Yeah, I just wonder, because like Korean food is full of umami as well, you know, and there's just so much of like fermentation that is part of those really dark, complex tastes that make it so delicious.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself going? I mean, what's your dream for Sunhee's, or what you're doing in the community, and all the work that you're doing with refugees and immigrants and just the community in general?
Yeah, so like I said, when we were expanding, we really did focus on vertical growth and vertical expansion, which is why even when people ask me, you know, why don't you start a Sunhee's in Saratoga, I had to, you know, politely say no. And it's because, you know, we really found that having diverse revenue streams is more sustainable for the business in the long run. And we really wanted to reach deeper into the community that we're currently serving, and which is actually currently enrolled in law school. I'm a 1L over at Albany Law, finished. So our next step is to start thinking about how we can incorporate legal services into our business model. I mean, legal services can act in numerous ways, everything from, you know, labor laws to immigration law, you know, having work visas and and also going beyond that and working with people who are seeking asylum or wanting to achieve citizenship. So we believe that kind of service is much needed. There are a handful of providers and great attorneys in this area, but it just isn't enough, which is why we think, again, having combined services, employment, education, legal, who knows, maybe in the future, medical, I don't know, but, like a one-stop access point would be very, very beneficial for the people that we're working with. And I don't know, back when I'm 30 years old now. When I was in my mid 20s and early 20s especially, I think I always thought bigger was better. With dreams like, oh, you have a big restaurant and you have multiple chains and you're growing. And now I'm just getting to a point where I really want to just go deep with people. Like, I want to get deep and have those one-on-ones, and even if we don't have a staff that's humongous, like I want each individual staff member to be so happy and so content and growing at the same time with us. That's more important to me than counting the numbers that we have in our English classes or even our programming, which is why I think having our business model the way it is so helpful, because we don't have to reel in the numbers. We don't have anyone to report to. We just make our, we make our food, we sell it, and we use that money for our programs. And so I think having even deeper roots in the coming years and being flexible enough to adapt to our community's needs as we see fit is going to be really important, as even in the aftermath of COVID.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really, that just sounds so wise. I can't, can you think of another model like yours? Like I can't, like, that just encompasses so many aspects of human life and needs. Like I can't. Did you have a model to basis of this? Just all came from you and your vision of the world, right?
Oh no, I definitely, I think I've had a lot of inspiration and role models, before me. I think even like decades ago, in different ways. I think about, even like Chobani, the yogurt company, has a lot of employment opportunities for refugees. There was, I remember a bakery in New York City that worked exclusively with refugee women, and they offered like 8-month training programs so that people can learn how to bake. Even like those urban rooftop farms, they had like farming internships for refugees and asylum seekers that I was very much inspired by. So I definitely don't think this is new. I think the way in which it's more small scale and intimate might be particular just to us, and the way we do things. And I do have to say there aren't many Korean farm-to-table restaurants out there, so that could also be a new arena. So the combination, like any individual, it makes us unique.
No, it's almost like you've harvested from like all these different, definitely all those things that you just mentioned, so many amazing things that have been happening, and the confluence between, food and food production and farming and community experience. But I don't know, I find, first of all, okay, I'm blown away. You're only 30 years old. Oh my God. Oh my God, what are you going to be doing when you're 40? I can't even, you're going to just like, you're going to blow up.
You should have seen me 3 years ago. I had braces and everything. I look like I was 16. People were really impressed.
That's a sign for all of us. We need to get braces so we sure that we actually are. Gosh, Gina, I'm so inspired talking to you, and I'm so thrilled that you've taken the time to share all these incredible things. Anything we can do to help, if there's, just like you are doing such amazing work on so many levels, and it really is like just kind of a model to aspire to. And I'm aware that we're about at 7:40, almost 7:45, the bewitching hour for questions. And I don't want to cut short because I'm sure people will have questions for you, but can I just say thank you so much. You are really amazing. And I'm so grateful for everything you're doing for the community and for the Capital Region. So let's open it up to questions.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you so much, Jinah. that was very inspiring. It's really, I don't even know what to, it's hard to like count that much. So we actually have a lot of questions coming in, but I think this is, I'm just going to start off with one of the comments that came through. Somebody had, Cindy has said, you don't look a day over 20, you're wise beyond your years, and you have a great business model. So I think I think that kind of sums up on all levels of everything that we just heard. So, okay, so let's start. So Grayford was asking, what percentage would you say that your produce comes from your own farm?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I think that's something we're very transparent on, just because we live in New York State. We're in upstate New York. We don't have a year-long season. Over the summer, we're able to extend it because of our greenhouse, but I'd say probably like, oh gosh, May or June up until August at the latest, right? And during that season, we're able to source, you know, I'd say at least when it comes to produce, the majority of produce, either from our farm or other local farms. But when it comes to things like meat, that is something we had to make the very conscious decision not to have farm-raised meat. And that's because just the price point. It would just skyrocket, double our price point. And for us, accessibility and affordability was much more important than sticking to that particular principle. Although personally, that's what I would purchase. But so I would say anywhere between like 50 to 75% over the season. We also get our eggs from our farm. But in the winter time, it's really tough. Like it's very hard to even find local produce from other farmers, and so we've had to make it work. I always say, like, even especially as a business, we still have a menu, we still have regular customers, and we need to deliver what we promise. And if it means I have to go to Price Chopper, down the street tonight just to get some spinach, like I'm going to do that. But at the same time, we kind of have these tiers of, okay, like here's our first go-to, our second, third, and we'll work down that line to make sure we have the product.
That's awesome. Now, I think this is more of a question for me, but I think it kind of goes along with the farm. Do you do tours of the farm? I think that's probably one question that everybody probably has.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. My dad, Farmer Amos would love to show you a tour. And we're going to open it back up. We do farm tours and dinners. We specialize in Korean barbecue right in the field. It's really beautiful. You could even do a kimchi workshop along with that, where you go into the greenhouse, pick your own vegetables, and then make kimchi with that particular seasonal vegetable. Oh,
that's awesome.
We put a pause on that last year, but we'll probably start doing it again in June.
That's great. Okay, so let's see what we got here. So do you try to, I think you kind of went over this a little bit, but maybe a little bit more, and I know I'm going to completely slaughter this word. Do you try to infuse American flavors in your cooking, or do you try to stay as traditional as possible? And also, how spicy is your tteokbokki?
Tteokbokki. Whoever asked probably knows a lot about Korean street food, right? That was talking about koswa, for umami. Thank you for that. Meaning of like both nutty and a deep flavor. But anyway, when it comes to our for our flavors, one of the instructions I would give to my mom as a chef is just cook the way you do at home. I think that was really key in maintaining. We want to stay true to authentic Korean flavor the way my family knows it. Now, that doesn't mean every Korean family does it the same way, but as far as my family goes, we wanted to share that with people. The flavor is 100% authentic Korean. I would say the presentation is very much Korean American. It's really, and that's where we wanted to kind of like infuse and blend subtle, differences, which is really like in Korea, you have those little side dishes, but for us, we just chose to do a la carte, make it simple. Again, more simplistic and approachable. And even the space itself is not, a lot of Koreans will walk into it and be like, this is not a Korean restaurant. It looks more like a cafe. And it's true, that's the aesthetic that we were going for, that whole like rustic chic, but also infused. I was very inspired by a lot of Korean architecture where it's mostly like stone and dark wood. And so we tied that into the space itself. But again, no one would walk in and be like, this looks like a Korean restaurant.
All right. So Rachel says that her best friend growing up was Korean, and she used to go to her house after school and eat rice and kimchi as a snack. And what was the turning point for you where you went from being embarrassed with, the fish at 12 years old to where you were proud of it and sharing it with your friends?
There were two turning points for me. The first one was when I was 11. It was the first time I had visited Korea after being born there. And I just remember thinking like, wow, there's people who look like, a lot more people who look like me. Because I was always surrounded by white kids. Like it was mostly white people and non-Koreans. And I remember just always like wanting to be white as a kid. But when I was 11 years old, I finally accepted the way at least I looked. Physically, I thought, okay, this is how I look, and I'm proud of that. Like there are other people who look like me, and but at the same time, like I didn't necessarily belong in Korea either, because just culturally it was so different from the way I was in America. But then in high school, my sophomore year, I made a great group of friends with fellow Korean Americans who also, most of them actually were born in the United States, and I think that was my turning point where I realized like, okay, I'm not Korean, I'm not American, I'm Korean American. I'm this fusion of different, that's when I understood what cross-culturalism actually means. And at that point was when I wanted to learn more about that kind of like, tug and rope, pull and tug kind of thing, and learn more about who I was as a Korean American in upstate New York.
Hey, Katrina, do you mind, like, yeah. I just want to jump in here because I'm just thinking about, like, as you're talking, Jinah, also just like the prevalence now with like Korean filmmakers. I mean, first Oscar, for a Korean filmmaker, and so many amazing writers now, the book, just like, are you feeling like there's a real, like, flowering of Korean culture, like globally? Or do you feel that? Do you feel that here?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a ripe time for Korean food. And my hope again is really that it's more than a fad. Like that's my fear actually, is that like people will think Korea, BTS is so hot right now, like all of this is so hot, but yeah, I think as Korean Americans, it's our responsibility to really find ways to fuse this with American culture. Like just the same way Chinese takeout is very much American, I think Korean food should be very much American. And that's why I love that movie, Minari, that I had mentioned before, is because that experience as an immigrant American, as a Korean American, it is America, it is us, like that is our identity, and that's the diverse group of people that makes up our nation. And so for me, like I see it as flowering, but I also see the potential of it being much more than just a temporary spotlight. Like I think if we can handle this correctly, again, I think Korean Americans have to take the ropes on this one. Like we can't sit idly by. Like we need to move in. Business owners, younger professionals, like we have to be there to thread this into the fabric of America.
Great.
Well, we do have a few more questions coming in. Somebody's asking, what would you say is the a good introductory meal in Korean cuisine for some who like it spicy and maybe not so much?
Okay, yeah, our rice bowl menu, I think, is the easiest go-to. Bibimbap if you like vegetables, bulgogi if you like meat, And then I forgot, someone was asking about our tteokbokki, which is a special like rice cake street food dish. It's mostly like medium spice. Even our spicy pork is not like burn your tongue off kind of spice. And Korean spice levels tend to be more surface level than anything. Like if it's really that bad, just have a glass of milk, it'll disappear. But with bulgogi, it's a soy sesame sauce, and it's a deep marinade, not spicy at all. Same thing with our kimchi, it's more on the mild side. And the mandu, which is our version of dumplings, is also a nice introduction. And especially if you know friends who are very like meat and potatoes, I would say the bulgogi and mandu combination is perfect. And bibimbap is one of my favorites just because I think it's one of the most wholesome dishes on our menu.
That's great. That's good. Good to know. So let me see. We have one more question that's come in, and then I got some questions for Elizabeth. As you mentioned that the sky is the limit, do you see a large goal coming in your future in the next like 10 to 15 years that you would like to achieve?
Oof. Beyond the legal services aspect.
Legal. I mean, that's a pretty aspirational.
Oh, thanks for the question, Tim. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
I don't know, like all of us restaurant people, it's hard to even think, a couple months down the line. And, actually, another thing I had thought about is thinking about the role of affordable housing in our communities. And so, especially as we're expanding our real estate portfolio, we had the opportunity to purchase a couple buildings. It's all like very small scale stuff. We're doing all the hands-on work ourselves. But I think about how critical it is even when we find housing for staff, combining like salary packages, and especially for new Americans who might have a hard time finding their first apartment. They need transitional housing, but don't want to go to a shelter. So I think about how much more beneficial and deeper our services can be if we can also offer housing options. So those are like, and I would love to, and again, I love the whole combination of for-profit and nonprofit. So if we make transitional housing, I would want it to look like little boutique hotel rooms that have Asian flair to it, and rent it out when it's not being occupied, and make money off of that too. Use that to offset the seasons when we do, need to, when we want to let someone stay there because they need it at that moment. And so those are kind of ideas and thoughts I've had. Building renovations always take a little longer than we anticipate, but we are working on that right now. We have a building that's completely gutted and vacant right here on 4th Street next to our English classroom space. So we're thinking we'll start with a couple, studio apartments and see how that goes.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
You're very, very inspirational. It's tough to live up to and everything she's done in such a short time. So for you, Elizabeth, what's next on the plate for SPAC and our culinary ventures, and where do you, maybe we could team up with Jinah to do something, or
Absolutely. No, I would absolutely love to do that. And, Culinary Arts at SPAC was launched last fall with Kim Klopstock and Pam Abrams. And, so for when Jinah said, oh, I was like, oh, culinary arts, like, it's not just about, chefs and preparing food. It really is about the deeper meaning of food and how it connects us. And that's, there are people who've said to me, like, what in the world is SPAC doing, like promoting culinary arts, right? And for me, like, SPAC is really about creating and providing those experiences for people that bring us together around the things that we all consider essential to our souls. And there's nothing more essential than food, so, and I also think about, like, I know for myself, like, I've been so lucky to travel the world through my previous iterations, like as a record label person and an artist manager. And I've traveled a lot in Asia, and always the food precedes my obsession with the culture. And that happened in Korea, it happened in Japan, it happened in China, it's happened all over the world. That the food is the first thing that you taste that takes you into another place. And you know, when you're transported to that other place, you're no longer fixed in your own little reality, and you could, you know, you put yourself in another culture, you put yourself in another person's place. And for me, like, food is that first line of connection between people. So you'll see a lot more of these sorts of events happening. And I just love it, Gina, that you like it. The food is the central thing, but it's bringing all these aspects of community to get together. And that really does speak so much to what SPAC's mission is around these sort of expanded definitions of programming that we're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So that about wraps everything up. Thank you again, Jinah, for all of your time tonight. And if anybody on Junior Committee would like to stay behind, we're going to have a breakout after if you'd like. And I thank you, everybody, for joining.